She built her career on playing it safe until one night changed everything and taught her that true power comes from choosing love over fear. The soft jazz music filled the elegant art gallery as people walked around with wine glasses in their hands. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings and sculptures that caught the light perfectly. Elena stood near a large bronze sculpture, watching the crowd with calm eyes. She had organized this entire evening and everything had to be perfect. At 34, Elena had built a reputation as one of the city's most respected art curators. She moved through the gallery with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style that showed off her graceful neck. When she spoke to visitors about the artwork, her passion was clear. She knew every piece, every artist, and every story behind the creations. David arrived at the gallery feeling slightly out of place. At 38, he was still getting used to life in the big city after his divorce. His architect's eye immediately noticed the clean lines of the gallery space and how the lighting made each piece look special. He picked up a glass of wine and started walking around, hoping to lose himself in the art. He stopped in front of a striking sculpture made of twisted metal that seemed to reach toward the ceiling. The piece looked like it was frozen in the middle of changing into something else. David found himself studying the way the metal curved and bent, thinking about the engineering behind such a complex design. Most people see chaos when they look at that piece, a smooth voice said beside him. David turned to see Elena approaching. She wore a simple black dress that seemed both professional and elegant. Her eyes held a spark of intelligence that immediately caught his attention. "I see transformation," David replied, looking back at the sculpture, like something breaking free from what it used to be. Elena smiled, genuinely pleased by his response. That's exactly what the artist intended. She created this after going through a difficult period in her life. Each twist represents a moment when she chose to change rather than stay stuck. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, both studying the artwork. David noticed how Elena's presence seemed to make the whole gallery feel more alive. She had a way of looking at things that made them seem more important, more meaningful. "Are you the curator?" David asked, though he somehow already knew the answer. "Elena," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm and warm. "David, I'm an architect. I just moved here a few months ago." "What brought you to our city?" Elena asked as they began walking slowly toward the next piece. David hesitated for a moment. "Starting over," he said simply. "Sometimes you need a change of scenery to figure out who you really are." Elena nodded as if she understood perfectly. "Art has taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most challenging transformations." They moved through the gallery together, stopping at different pieces. Elena shared stories about each artist while David offered insights about the structural elements and design choices. Their conversation flowed naturally, like they had known each other for years rather than minutes. At a painting of a stormy ocean, David mentioned how the artist used color to create a sense of movement. Elena was impressed by how he saw the technical skill behind the emotional impact. Most visitors either loved or hated the pieces without understanding the craft involved. "You have a good eye," Elena said. "Most people just look for pretty pictures." "Buildings and art aren't so different," David replied. "Both need strong foundations, but the real magic happens when form meets function in unexpected ways." As the evening continued, more people arrived, but Elena found herself staying close to David. She introduced him to some of the artists, and he asked thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest in their work. Elena watched him interact with others and noticed his kindness, the way he really listened when people spoke. During a quiet moment, they found themselves alone near a window overlooking the city lights. The gallery was getting busier, but their corner felt peaceful. "Do you miss your old life?" Elena asked softly. David considered the question. "Some parts, but I'm learning that missing something and wanting it back are two different things." "That's wise," Elena said. "I've spent years learning the difference between what I thought I wanted and what actually makes me happy." There was something in her voice that made David look at her more carefully. Beneath her composed exterior, he sensed depth and perhaps some loneliness that matched his own. The gallery owner rang a small bell, announcing that the featured artist would be speaking in a few minutes. Elena excused herself to introduce the speaker, but before leaving, she touched David's arm gently. "Don't leave without saying goodbye," she said. David watched her walk to the front of the gallery, commanding attention without effort. When she spoke about the artist's work, her passion filled the room. She had a gift for making people see art not just as decoration, but as windows into the human experience. After the speech, the crowd began to thin out. David found Elena again, this time near the entrance as people were leaving. "Thank you for making this evening special," David said. "I haven't felt this interested in anything for months." Elena studied his face in the soft lighting. There was something about David that felt different from the usual gallery visitors. He seemed genuine, unguarded in a way that was both refreshing and slightly dangerous to her carefully maintained composure. "Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere quieter?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the invitation. "I know a little place nearby that stays open late." David felt his heart skip slightly. "I'd like that very much." As they gathered their things, Elena realized she was taking an unusual step. She rarely mixed her professional life with personal connections, and she never acted on impulses. But something about David's honest appreciation for art and his gentle way of seeing the world made her want to know more about him. They walked out into the cool night air together, leaving the gallery behind. The city streets were alive with people and lights, but Elena felt like they were in their own private bubble. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about her next exhibition or business meeting. She was simply looking forward to spending more time with this thoughtful stranger who had appeared in her carefully ordered world. The evening was just beginning, and Elena had the feeling that something important was about to change in her life. She glanced at David walking beside her and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to be spontaneous, but tonight felt like the perfect time to take a chance. The small restaurant Elena chose was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place you could easily walk past without noticing. Inside, candles flickered on wooden tables, and the walls were lined with local artwork. It felt intimate without being overwhelming. Exactly the kind of place Elena preferred for meaningful conversations. They settled into a corner table, and David noticed how Elena seemed to relax once they were away from the gallery crowd. Her shoulders dropped slightly and she smiled more easily. The professional mask she wore so well was beginning to slip, revealing someone warmer and more playful underneath. "I come here when I need to think," Elena said, looking around the familiar space. "The owner is an artist himself. He understands that sometimes you need a place where nobody expects anything from you." David nodded, understanding that feeling completely. "I've been searching for places like that since I moved here. Everything feels so fast, so demanding." Their conversation flowed naturally as they ordered dinner. Elena talked about her work with genuine excitement, describing how she discovered new artists and helped them find their voice. She explained how she could walk into a studio and immediately sense whether an artist was creating from their heart or just following trends. "There's this moment," Elena said, her eyes lighting up, "when an artist stops trying to please everyone else and starts creating what they really feel. You can see it in their work immediately. It becomes fearless." David leaned forward, fascinated by her passion. "Is that what happened with the sculpture we saw tonight? The twisted metal one?" "Exactly. When I first met that artist, her work was pretty but safe. Then she went through something difficult, and instead of hiding from it, she let it fuel her art. The piece you saw tonight was the first thing she created after she decided to stop playing it safe." David thought about his own life, how his divorce had forced him to rebuild everything from scratch. "Sometimes breaking apart is the only way to become something better," he said quietly. Elena studied his face in the candlelight. "What broke you apart, David?" He was surprised by her directness, but something about her made him want to be honest. "My marriage ended because we were both trying so hard to be what we thought the other person wanted that we forgot who we actually were. We built a beautiful life on paper, but it felt empty inside. And now you're here, starting over," Elena said. It wasn't a question, but an observation filled with understanding. "What about you?" David asked. "Have you always known what you wanted?" Elena smiled, but there was something complicated in her expression. "I learned early that if you don't know what you want, other people will decide for you. I grew up in a small town where everyone expected me to follow a certain path. Get married young, have kids, be satisfied with a quiet life. But that wasn't enough for you. I wanted more. I wanted to see art that took my breath away, to meet people who created beauty from nothing, to build something meaningful with my own hands. She paused, twirling her wine glass slowly. Some people thought I was selfish for wanting those things. David shook his head. Knowing what you want and going after it isn't selfish. It's brave. Their food arrived, but neither of them was really focused on eating. They were too caught up in learning about each other, sharing pieces of their stories that they rarely told anyone else. Elena told David about her early days in the city, working for free at small galleries just to learn the business. She described sleeping on friends' couches and eating cheap noodles for dinner, so she could afford to attend art shows and meet artists. I remember standing in front of my first major exhibition, the one that really launched my career, she said. I was terrified that nobody would come, that all the work would be meaningless. But then the opening night arrived, and the room was full of people really seeing the art, really feeling something from it. That's when I knew I had found my purpose. David shared his own journey, talking about how he had always dreamed of designing buildings that made people feel something, not just functional spaces, but places that could lift spirits and bring communities together. I want to create spaces where people can be their best selves, he explained. Libraries that inspire learning, community centers that bring neighbors together, homes that actually feel like sanctuaries. As the evening went on, Elena found herself drawn to David's thoughtful way of seeing the world. He asked questions that showed he was really listening, and he shared his own experiences without trying to impress her or prove anything. When they finished dinner, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Would you like to see some art that most people never get to see? She asked. Private collection? David guessed. My apartment. I have some pieces that aren't ready for galleries yet. Work from artists who are still developing their voice. I'd like to know what you think of them. David felt his pulse quicken, not just from the invitation but from the trust it represented. Elena was offering to share something personal, something that mattered to her beyond the professional world. They walked through the quiet streets to Elena's building, an old brownstone that had been converted into apartments. Her place was on the 3rd floor, and as she unlocked the door, David could sense her slight nervousness. The apartment was exactly what he would have expected from Elena. Clean lines, carefully chosen furniture, and art everywhere. But these weren't the polished gallery pieces from earlier. These were raw emotional works that seemed to pulse with life. This is incredible, David said, stopping in front of a painting that seemed to shift and move in the lamplight. Who created this? A young woman who's never shown her work publicly. She paints her dreams literally. She keeps a sketchbook by her bed and captures the images from her sleep. Elena moved through her space differently here, more relaxed and natural. She showed David piece after piece, each with its own story of an artist taking risks and pushing boundaries. Why do you keep these here instead of in a gallery? David asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Because sometimes art needs to be lived with before it's ready to be shared with the world. These pieces are still growing, still becoming what they're meant to be. David understood that Elena was talking about more than just the art. She was describing her own process of becoming, of allowing herself to be vulnerable and authentic. As they stood together in her living room, surrounded by all this beautiful, unfinished art, Elena felt something shift inside her. For so long, she had been the curator, the one who helped others find their voice while keeping her own carefully controlled. But standing here with David, she felt ready to take her own risk. She turned to face him, her heart beating faster than usual. The evening had revealed something important about both of them, something worth exploring further. For the first time in years, Elena was ready to stop playing it safe and see what might happen if she followed her instincts. The morning sunlight filtered through Elena's sheer curtains, casting soft patterns across the hardwood floor. David woke slowly, taking a moment to remember where he was. Elena's apartment felt different in the daylight, more personal and welcoming. He could hear her moving quietly in the kitchen, the gentle sounds of coffee being prepared. Elena appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs, wearing a simple robe and looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and there was a contentment in her expression that made his heart skip. "Good morning," she said, settling beside him and handing him a cup. "I hope you like it strong." David accepted the coffee gratefully, noticing how natural this felt despite everything being so new between them. "This is perfect, thank you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up outside her window. Elena's neighborhood was quieter than the busy gallery district, filled with tree-lined streets and old buildings with character. "I don't usually do this," Elena said softly, not looking at him directly. "Neither do I," David replied, "but I'm glad we did." Elena turned to study his face, searching for any signs of regret or awkwardness. Instead, she found warmth and genuine affection that made her feel brave enough to continue being vulnerable. "Would you like to see more of the city today?" she asked. "There are places I go that tourists never find, places that actually matter to me." David's face lit up with interest. "I'd love that. I'm still learning this place, still trying to figure out where I belong." After they got ready, Elena led him through streets he had never explored. Their first stop was a small gallery in a converted warehouse, the kind of place you would never notice unless you knew what to look for. Inside, the walls were covered with work by emerging artists, pieces that were experimental and bold. "This is where I got my start," Elena explained, introducing David to the gallery owner, an older woman with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes. "Isabella gave me my first chance when no one else would." Isabella hugged Elena warmly and looked at David with curious approval. "Elena has excellent taste in art," she said with a knowing smile. "I trust her judgment completely." They spent an hour looking at the newest pieces, with Elena explaining why certain works excited her. David loved watching her analyze art, the way she could see potential that others missed. She had a gift for recognizing talent before it became obvious to everyone else. Their next stop was a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a flower market. The owner knew Elena by name and had her usual order ready before she asked. David noticed how Elena seemed to have these connections throughout the city, people who genuinely cared about her. "I come here when I need to write," Elena explained as they found a table by the window. "Grant proposals, exhibition descriptions, sometimes just thoughts I need to get out of my head." "You write beyond your professional work?" David asked. Elena nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Nothing important. Just observations about art and life. Ideas that come to me at random moments." David could tell there was more to it than she was letting on, but he didn't push. Instead, he watched her interact with the other customers and staff, noting how naturally kind she was when she wasn't maintaining her professional image. They walked to a bookstore specializing in art books and photography collections. Elena moved through the aisles like she was visiting old friends, pulling books from shelves and sharing why each one mattered to her. "This photographer changed how I see light," she said, showing David a collection of black and white portraits. "And this book taught me that art doesn't have to be pretty to be beautiful." David found himself learning not just about art, but about Elena herself. Each book she chose revealed something about her interests, her values, her way of understanding the world. As they browsed, Elena asked David about his architectural influences, and he described buildings that had inspired him to become an architect. They discovered they both loved spaces that made people feel something, whether it was peace, excitement, or wonder. "Show me something that represents your dreams," Elena said as they left the bookstore. David thought for a moment, then led her to a construction site where a new community center was being built. They stood behind the safety fence, looking at the steel framework rising from the concrete foundation. "I wasn't part of designing this," David explained, "but this is the kind of project I want to work on. Places where families can come together, where kids can learn and play safely, where neighbors can meet and build connections." Elena watched his face as he talked about creating meaningful spaces for people. She could see his passion was as strong as hers, just focused on different forms of creation. "Have you submitted proposals for projects like this?" she asked. "I'm working on something," David said. "There's a community garden that needs a meeting space and classroom. Nothing fancy, but it would serve people who really need it." Elena felt a flutter of excitement. "Tell me more about it." David described his vision for a simple building that would blend with the garden setting while providing flexible space for classes, meetings, and events. As he talked, Elena began to see connections between his architectural dreams and her art world. "You should meet some of my artists," she said suddenly. "Several of them are interested in community projects, public art that actually serves a purpose." David's eyes widened with interest. That could be incredible. Art integrated into the building design from the beginning, not just added on later. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking and talking, sharing ideas and dreams they rarely discussed with anyone else. Elena found herself opening up about her long-term goals, her desire to eventually open her own gallery focused on artists who were making art about social change and community building. I want to represent artists who aren't just creating beautiful objects, she explained. I want to work with people who are using their talent to make the world better somehow. David was struck by how similar their ultimate goals were, even though they worked in different fields. They both wanted to create things that brought people together and made life more meaningful. As evening approached, they found themselves back in Elena's neighborhood, walking slowly, as if neither wanted the day to end. Elena realized she hadn't thought about work emails or upcoming exhibitions all day, something that never happened to her. Thank you for sharing your world with me, David said as they reached her building. Elena looked at him, feeling something shift in her chest. This man had appeared in her life unexpectedly, and somehow everything felt different now. More possible, more hopeful. Would you like to stay for dinner? She asked. I make a decent pasta, and I have wine that's been waiting for the right occasion. David smiled, understanding that she was offering more than just a meal. She was asking him to stay, to continue building whatever was growing between them. I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be, he replied. As they climbed the stairs to her apartment, Elena felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. For so long she had focused on helping other people's dreams come true through their art. Now, for the first time, she was allowing herself to dream about her own future, and David was somehow part of that vision. The day had revealed how much they had in common, how naturally they understood each other's passions and ambitions. Elena realized she was falling for David not despite his differences from her usual type, but because of how perfectly he complemented her own dreams and values. 3 weeks had passed since that first night at the gallery, and Elena's life had taken on a rhythm she had never experienced before. David had become part of her daily routine in the most natural way. They would meet for coffee before work, share lunch when their schedules allowed, and spend evenings talking about everything from art to architecture to their dreams for the future. Elena found herself smiling more often, humming while she worked, and looking forward to each day in a way that surprised her. Her assistant noticed the change immediately, commenting on how relaxed and happy Elena seemed lately. But on a rainy Thursday morning, everything shifted. Elena was reviewing submissions for her next exhibition when her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach drop. It was her former business partner, the man who had been both her mentor and her biggest professional mistake. Hello? Vincent, she answered, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Elena, darling, I'm back in the city. We need to talk. Vincent had been gone for 6 months, traveling through Europe and building connections with international galleries. Their partnership had ended badly 2 years ago when Elena discovered he had been taking credit for her curatorial work and undermining her relationships with artists behind her back. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Elena said, but Vincent had already hung up. Within an hour, Vincent appeared at her gallery. He looked exactly the same, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that commanded attention. He had the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet when he entered, and Elena had once found that power attractive. Now it just made her tired. You've done well for yourself, Vincent said, looking around her gallery space with an appraising eye. Though I see you're still playing it safe with emerging artists. When are you going to graduate to serious collectors? Elena kept her expression calm, but inside she felt her old defensive walls rising up. I like working with artists who have something real to say. Always the idealist, Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what I missed about you. Your passion for lost causes. What do you want, Vincent? He walked closer, invading her personal space in the way he always had. I'm putting together a consortium of galleries for a major European tour. High-profile artists, serious money, international recognition. I want you to be part of it. Elena felt a familiar tug of temptation. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of when she first started in the art world. International exposure, established artists, financial security, what's the catch? She asked. No catch. Just us working together again the way we used to. We were good together, Elena. In business and otherwise. The way he said it made Elena's skin crawl. She had forgotten how Vincent could make professional opportunities sound like personal favors, how he blurred the lines between business and romance to keep people off balance. I need time to think about it, she said. Don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait for people who can't make decisions. After Vincent left, Elena felt shaken in a way she hadn't experienced in months. All the confidence and peace she had built with David suddenly felt fragile. She canceled their lunch plans, claiming she was too busy with gallery work. That evening, when David came by her apartment as usual, Elena was distant and distracted. She made dinner but barely ate, responding to his questions with short answers that didn't invite follow-up. "Everything okay?" David asked finally, setting down his fork and looking at her with concern. "Just work stuff," Elena said, not meeting his eyes. David knew she was lying, but he didn't push. He had learned that Elena needed space to process things before she could talk about them. But over the next few days, the distance between them grew wider. Elena found herself questioning everything about their relationship. Vincent's visit had reminded her of how complicated her professional world could be, how much ambition and politics were involved in building a successful career. David's life seemed so straightforward in comparison. He designed buildings, he submitted proposals, he built things that served clear purposes, but Elena's world was full of egos and power games and unspoken rules about who mattered and who didn't. She began to worry that David wouldn't understand the pressures she faced, the difficult choices she sometimes had to make. When David tried to talk to her about his community garden project, Elena found herself only half listening. When he suggested they attend a gallery opening together, she made excuses about needing to work. She was pulling away and they both knew it. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. Elena had agreed to meet David for dinner, but Vincent called just as she was leaving her gallery. He was at an upscale restaurant across town, having dinner with an influential collector who might be interested in funding the European tour. "Come join us," Vincent said. "Let me introduce you. This could change everything for your career." Elena found herself saying yes. She called David and canceled their dinner plans again, claiming a work emergency. But this time she could hear the hurt in his voice. "Elena, what's going on?" David asked. "You've been pulling away for days. Did I do something wrong?" "It's not about you," Elena said, which was true but sounded like a lie even to her own ears. "I just have a lot of pressure at work right now. Then let me help. Or at least let me understand what you're going through." But Elena couldn't explain about Vincent without revealing how tangled her professional and personal life could become. She couldn't admit that she was terrified of choosing between the safe relationship she was building with David and the ambitious career opportunities that Vincent represented. "Need some space to figure things out," she said finally. The silence on David's end of the phone felt endless. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk." Elena hung up and immediately regretted it. But Vincent was waiting and the collector was important, and this was her career. She convinced herself she was making the right choice as she walked toward the restaurant. The dinner was everything Elena had expected. The collector was impressed by her knowledge and passion. Vincent made sure she got credit for her insights and expertise. By the end of the evening, she had been offered a role in the European tour that would put her on the international art scene in a way she had always dreamed of. But as she walked home alone, Elena felt empty instead of excited. The triumph felt hollow without David to share it with. She realized that somewhere along the way, his opinion had become more important to her than the approval of art world power players. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, thinking about calling David to apologize and explain everything, but her phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Brilliant evening. I knew you still had it in you. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss details." Elena stared at the message, feeling pulled between two different versions of herself. There was the ambitious curator who had worked for years to reach this level of recognition. And there was the woman who had found unexpected happiness with a kind architect who made her feel seen and valued for who she really was. She set her phone aside without responding to Vincent, and without calling David. For the first time in her adult life, Elena didn't know which choice would make her happy. The successful professional life she had built felt like it might be incompatible with the personal happiness she had found, and she wasn't sure she was brave enough to risk either one for the other. As she got ready for bed, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked successful and put together, but her eyes held a sadness that reminded her of the person she used to be before David came into her life. She realized she had to make a choice, but she wasn't sure she was ready for the consequences of either option. Elena spent the weekend alone in her apartment, surrounded by the art that usually brought her comfort. But even her favorite pieces seemed to be asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Every sculpture about transformation reminded her of David. Every painting about taking risks made her think about the choice she was avoiding. On Saturday afternoon, she received a call from Isabella, the gallery owner who had given Elena her first chance years ago. Elena hadn't spoken to her mentor in months, so the timing felt like more than coincidence. "I heard Vincent is back in town," Isabella said without any small talk, "and I heard he's been making you offers." Elena should have been surprised that news traveled so fast in their small art world, but she wasn't. "How did you know?" "Elena, dear, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know how Vincent operates, and I know what he does to talented women who threaten his ego." Isabella invited Elena for tea that afternoon, and Elena found herself walking the familiar path to the small gallery where her career had truly begun. Isabella's office was cluttered with art books, half-finished grant applications, and photos of successful exhibitions. It felt like a refuge from the polished professional world Elena usually inhabited. "Tell me what's really going on," Isabella said, pouring tea from a chipped but beautiful ceramic pot. Elena found herself explaining everything: Vincent's offer, her confusion about the European tour, her fear that accepting would mean losing David, and her terror that refusing would mean giving up her professional dreams. "And this man, David, what does he think about your career?" Isabella asked. "That's just it," Elena said. "He supports everything I do. He gets excited about my exhibitions. He asks thoughtful questions about the artists I work with, and he never makes me feel like I have to choose between my work and my happiness." Isabella smiled knowingly. "Then what's the real problem?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into her teacup. "I'm scared that if I turn down Vincent's offer, I'll regret it forever. This is the kind of opportunity that might never come again. And what if you take Vincent's offer? What then? Then I get everything I thought I wanted professionally. But you lose David. Maybe. Or maybe I just lose the version of myself that I've become with him. The version that feels worthy of love without having to prove anything." Isabella reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "Let me ask you something. When you imagine yourself 5 years from now, what do you see?" Elena closed her eyes and tried to picture her future. She saw herself in a beautiful gallery, surrounded by important people and internationally acclaimed art. But in that vision, she was alone. Then she imagined herself working with emerging artists, helping them find their voices, coming home to David and sharing the day's discoveries with someone who truly understood her passion. "I see myself happy," Elena said softly. "Really happy, not just successful. Then you already know what to choose." That evening, Elena called David. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 days, and her heart raced as the phone rang. "Elena?" David's voice was cautious but warm. "Can I come over? I need to explain everything, and I owe you an apology." An hour later, Elena stood in David's apartment for the first time. It was smaller than hers, but filled with architectural books, sketches of building designs, and photos of structures that had inspired him. On his desk, she saw plans for the community garden project he had mentioned weeks ago. "I've been an idiot," Elena said without any preamble, "and I need to tell you why." She told David everything about Vincent, the European tour offer, and her fears about choosing between professional success and personal happiness. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing more understanding as she explained. "I was scared that you wouldn't fit into my professional world," Elena admitted, "that the politics and competition would be too much, or that I'd have to become someone different to succeed at the highest levels. And now?" David asked gently. "Now I realize that the highest level isn't about impressing people like Vincent. It's about doing work that matters with people I respect, while being true to who I really am." David smiled and pulled Elena into his arms. "I was scared too," he confessed. "I thought maybe you were realizing that I wasn't sophisticated enough for your world, that I was holding you back somehow." "Never," Elena said firmly. "You make me better, not different. You make me remember why I fell in love with art in the first place." The next morning, Elena called Vincent and declined his offer. She explained that she was committed to building something meaningful with emerging artists, rather than chasing international recognition with established names. Vincent's response was predictable. "You're making a mistake, Elena. You'll regret this when you're still working with nobodies while I'm showing in Paris and Milan." "Maybe," Elena said. "But I'd rather regret taking a risk on something I believe in than regret playing it safe with something that doesn't feel authentic." 3 months later, Elena opened her own gallery. The space was smaller than her previous location, but it was entirely hers. She chose to focus on artists who were creating work about community, transformation, and social change. The opening night featured the dream painter whose work hung in Elena's apartment, along with several other artists who had never shown their work publicly before. David designed the gallery space to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. He created flexible areas that could host community workshops and artist talks, not just formal exhibitions. The integration of his architectural vision with Elena's curatorial style created something unique in the city's art scene. The opening night was different from the glossy gallery events Elena usually attended. The crowd was more diverse, more engaged, more genuinely excited about the art. Children came with their parents to see work that spoke to their experiences. Local community leaders mingled with art collectors. Young artists networked with established creatives who were looking for fresh perspectives. Elena stood in the center of it all, watching people connect with art in meaningful ways. She felt proud in a way she had never experienced at her previous exhibitions. This wasn't just about selling beautiful objects to wealthy collectors. This was about creating a space where art could actually change how people saw themselves and their communities. David appeared beside her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I finally found what I was looking for without realizing I was searching for it," Elena replied. As the evening continued, Elena received messages of congratulations from colleagues throughout the art world. Even some of Vincent's former clients had attended, drawn by word of mouth about the unique artists Elena was representing. Isabella arrived late in the evening, making her way through the crowd to hug Elena warmly. "This is what success actually looks like," she said, gesturing to the diverse, engaged crowd. "Not fancy openings with people who are just there to be seen." Near the end of the night, the dream painter approached Elena nervously. "I sold 3 pieces tonight," she said in amazement. "And more importantly, people understood what I was trying to say with them." Elena felt tears of pride and joy welling up in her eyes. This was why she had gotten into the art world in the first place, to help artists find their audiences and to help people discover art that spoke to their souls. As they cleaned up after the last visitors left, David and Elena worked side by side, carefully wrapping unsold pieces and making notes about follow-up conversations with potential collectors. "What happens now?" David asked as they finished packing up. Elena looked around the gallery that represented everything she had built on her own terms. "Now we keep growing. I have 3 more artists who want to show their work, and you have that community center project starting next month." "Together?" David asked. Elena smiled, feeling more certain than she had about anything in years. "Together. I love what we're building, David. Both the gallery and us." 6 months later, Elena's gallery had become a respected voice in the city's art scene. She was working with artists who were changing how people thought about public art, community engagement, and social justice. David's community center had been completed, featuring integrated art installations by several of Elena's artists. The space they had created together, both professionally and personally, felt solid and authentic in a way that Elena's previous ambitious plans never had. She had learned that true success wasn't about impressing people who already had power, but about creating something meaningful that served people who genuinely needed it. As Elena stood in her gallery one evening, preparing for another exhibition, she reflected on how much had changed since that first night when she had taken a risk with David. She had thought that declaring, "You're mine tonight," was about claiming a moment of passion. Now she realized it had been about claiming the courage to be authentic, to choose love over fear, and to build something real rather than something that just looked impressive from the outside. The woman who smiled like a queen wasn't performing confidence anymore. She had become genuinely powerful by choosing vulnerability, partnership, and purpose over the hollow victories that had once seemed so important.